All right. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. I am so excited. This was one of my first audiobooks of the year, and I was just sharing that I haven't read an audiobook in a very long time. But this gentleman, I'm telling you, if you have not read this book, if you have not listened to the audio, we're gonna get into it today. But this is a complete masterpiece. A complete masterpiece. I'm not joking, and I vouch for this, and I'm gonna tell people because I haven't heard anything like this in a very, very long time.
Wow.
Can you introduce yourself,
Wow.
please?
Peace. That's what's up. Thank you. Peace, everybody. My name is Tony Keith Jr., PhD, actually. You call me Dr. Keith if you want to.
Let's do it. Dr. Keith, let's do it.
I like to flex it every now and then. We can talk about it later. My family wanted me to put PhD on my book, but I'm the author of How the Boogeyman Became a Poet, a young adult debut, young adult memoir written in verse, just launched this past February. So yeah, shout out to the Boogeyman.
Doctor, I'm telling you. I'm going to jump right into it because we just talked about it. But like, if you are not into audiobooks or if you are into audiobooks, you have to listen to this production. Like, let's talk a little bit about how it came about and just like the process that went into creating this book. Specifically the audio. Specifically the audio.
Yeah, that's a really good question because what's interesting is, I am not the world should probably know, I am not a formally classically trained writer. I do not have an MFA. I probably took maybe a couple of, beyond like English, like the normal stuff you have to take. But anyway, the reason why I share that is, I'm a spoken word artist. And so I'm used to being on the stage, I'm used to performing, you know what I mean? And so when it came down to even getting to something like an audio book, you have to realize that it starts first with I was a poet on the page, like I'm on the stage, I was performing. And so what I often tell people is what happened was, this is the real story. What had happened was, this is the truth, February of 2020, I am at the University of South Carolina with none other than the brilliant, amazing author and one of my dear best friends in the world, Jason Reynolds, right? And everybody in the world knows Jason has
Shout
3
out
million.
To Jason. Shout out to Jason.
He got all the books, man. And so really is my brother. I love him. Best man in my wedding. I love him very much. So anyway, so we're at this event. We're visiting schools and we're talking with young people. And I'm talking about my life as a poet. He's talking about his life as a writer. Jason is a poet too. But anyway, and so what happens is after every event, there was always like a book signing, right? And so after one of these events, again, I'm sitting next to Jay. We're at this table at a book signing, and I'm just chilling. I'm just, sitting next to him chilling. And there's a line of people to get books signed by him. And this woman gets out of line, Black woman gets out of line with a little Black boy. And I don't know if this was mom and son, whatever, it was an adult. And he comes right up to me and he says, "Where's your book?" I was like, not, which is because it wasn't, do you have a book? Right? It's like the book that you have, like, where is it? Where? And so I told him that night, I was like, I published on the stage, right? Like I said something. And, I went back to my hotel room that night and I was like, I wonder if that little boy was trying to figure some stuff out about himself. Maybe it's because my book is about how I became a first-year college student, how I started coming out the closet as gay, and that's sort of how I discovered poetry as my voice. And I was like, I wonder where are the books for kids like him, and where's the books for like the adults in their lives, right? I was like, but where are the books? And so I went back to my room and I started writing 500 words of something. Like I didn't know what it was. And the very next morning, I'm having coffee with Jay at Starbucks, and I shouldn't even shout out Starbucks, but it was important part of the story. Terrible coffee.
We get it.
It's bad coffee, right? So bad. And so, I was like, "Yo, I'm gonna write a book," and he was like, "Yeah, okay, Tone." And sure enough, we fly back to DC in March 2020. COVID-19 hits. Right. And so there was sort of this moment of like, I have no choice now but to sit sequestered in my my tiny apartment with my newlywed husband at the time and write this thing out. I had to get this thing out. And so that's kind of, at least the impetus to the book was, it was inspired. Wow. This little boy came and kind of called it out at me. Like this, like, where is yours? Like the one that, like, where is it? Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. That is crazy. And it's crazy how much experience can influence what you do in the future. And that was just like, if you wouldn't have taken that as like a, an aha moment or like a wondering, you could have taken it so many different ways, right? But you took it as like a seed to plant
I did.
something,
I
right? Which
did.
is phenomenal. Which is
It
phenomenal.
really, really meant something to me, you know. And I
Mhm,
thought, and I really had to check myself, right? Because it was sort of this, Tony, it's not as if people have not asked you before where your book is, right? People
mhm,
just tell me when you're going to publish your man, when we going to get your book. I would hear
uh-huh,
this, but I would
uh-huh,
never really entertain it because I was like,
mhm,
what am I gonna write? Who's going to,
uh-huh,
what do I have to write about? And so,
mhm,
and again, shout out to Jay again because of his sort of burst opening into the young adult publishing world, right? Especially a black author, black man
mhm,
writing to, for the most part, black and brown kids,
mhm.
reading his work and other young adult writers, Mahogany
Hey,
Brown and Elizabeth Acevedo and Candace Elo, and like reading, I was like, oh, maybe the audience is this younger. Because I'm a black man with a PhD. I write to these adults all the time in these
mhm,
peer-reviewed academic journals with words that are
mhm,
13 letters long. You know
uh-huh.
what I mean? And so trying to think about, yeah, so I wanted something that was translatable and accessible
Mhm.
to communities outside of higher ed and all that. But give me, yeah, so that
And
little boy, shout out, I called
that's
him Daquan
that
in my head, little Daquan.
and speaking of little boy, you speak about the little boy in you and, how the Boogeyman became a
Yeah,
poet. And without me saying, because I've listened to the book, tell us a little bit about um, little Tony. Like, what did that
yeah,
look like for you?
yeah. So in this book, I'll contextualize it for quite a few, for all of y'all out there, right? Is this book takes place in spring 1999 and it ends in fall 2000, right? So this is
Mm.
in terms of the time period. I want folks to know that when they enter this book, right, Tony is going to be 17 years old. I'm going to be in my senior year of high school, right? I'm originally from Washington, D.C., but I was attending schools in Prince George's County, Maryland, right outside of the city.
Mhm,
And I'm in my senior year of high school. All of my friends are, for the most part, going to college. I have no idea what am I going to do. Like no one in our family's ever been. I
mhm,
have a girlfriend at the time, but I'm also pretty sure that I got some crushes on some boys, although I ain't never done nothing, right?
mhm,
And I'm also, I'm also secretly writing poetry to myself in the middle of the night or when no one's looking
mhm,
about all of my feelings and my emotions, right? And so that's what like so little Tony was a little boy who grew up single parent household. My father was in the military, but wound up having to get out because he was addicted to crack cocaine and alcohol and all kind of ugly, messy stuff. And I moved around quite a lot. My mom moved us around a lot, so I was just a kid just dealing with a whole lot.
mhm,
And I was also a kid who had found my way, at least found my voice via church. This is also an
mhm.
important part of the story, as you probably
It is.
heard it is in this book. I'm also a young boy singing in a church choir.
Mhm,
So you can imagine all the things that I'm battling against is beyond homophobia and
yeah.
internalizing, because right, because the boogeyman for the most part represents a metaphor for all of these heavy topics, right? And so
Mhm,
internalizing homophobia because I'm bullied and I'm teased in school for being a little soft, right, a little skinny. I couldn't play sports, but had nothing to do with my sexuality, but just nobody ever taught me. And so I'm dealing with this code switching of like, I'm trying to be straight, but I think I might be gay. And then I'm also learning that in order for me to go to college, I gotta write differently than I speak. So what readers
mhm.
will also get in this book, as you probably know, Gary, is I speak in African American vernacular English as my first language, and so I
Uh-huh.
make sure that in
Tony,
this
you
book,
do it so well. Oh my, Tony, you do it so well. Like you switch so well. When you did, I was like, yes, yes. Like I mean, I'm listening, and then your voice would change, and it would be. It's so funny. I had this conversation with someone earlier. How like, academia is so interesting in the
whew,
way that words are laid on the page, and
man,
I was listening to you and I could hear you switch every
yeah,
single time. And it was so purposeful every single time you did it. I mean,
I
sorry.
really
Yeah.
appreciate that. No, it's okay because I think that because again, it gets to sort of a bit more about what your earlier question was. I was a kid who was sort of forced to learn how to code switch without someone telling me that's exactly what was going on.
Mhm.
Right. Like what,
Mhm.
I mean, clearly I talk in this book about, I had a lot of English teachers, mostly white English teachers who would always tell me I spoke wrong. Right. Or that, somehow that my English was not good enough, but there was sort of
Uh-huh.
this enunciate better, like this idea that there was a better way of speaking. And I'm like, well,
Mhm.
what's wrong with the way I don't understand my mama speak like this. I don't understand. What's the problem
What's the
here? Right.
problem?
And so, yeah. And then of course now, once I figured out academia was trying to kind of, I say, scrape all
The
the beautiful
soul out of you.
out of my speech. I'm like, you know what? No, there are readers who speak like I speak or write like I
Uh-huh.
write or think like I think. Not all, but I mean, I want that representation in there. Like, F
Uh-huh.
that. Like,
Um,
it's a
it wa
book.
it was I have so many questions for you. I have to ask you this first. Can you
Uh,
as I was reading, there's so many moments, but one moment that stuck out to me was the spelling test.
oh, fucking clavichord. Ooh, like, ooh.
And like so many of us have had those, and I mean when I say us, I'm speaking specifically about Black people. We've
Yes.
had those moments where, first off, we are sometimes, not all of us, sometimes already feeling reluctant to share because we're in spaces that may not look like us, or we already
Yeah.
don't feel smart enough, or whatever the case may be. But then
Yeah.
there's this one person who always
Has
feels
to.
as if they need to share.
Yeah.
And the way you articulated that scenario was absolutely incredible.
Thank
Can
you.
you, like, walk us through a little bit,
Yeah.
like, you and we talk about this all the time, and you know this better than anybody, like, of the trauma that we have to, you know, go through as
Yeah.
we are writing our stories.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that experience and why you included that experience in this book.
Yeah, that's really a good question. What's bubbling in my mind is this idea of meaningful moments, right? So writing a
Mm,
memoir, which took me a while to be clear, because I'm not a classically trained writer, right? And so
mhm,
it took a while to figure out how to write this book. And so I knew that there was something about, well, Tony, you can't write your whole life because that's an autobiography. And so you need to, like, what are specific moments that really matter to you? And I'm someone who the world would probably, I love language. I'm fascinated by
mhm,
language and words and the power. Anyway, and so I kept thinking about what memories. And again, shout out to my editor, by the way, Ben Rosenthal.
mhm,
He's no longer at HarperCollins, but he says, because I included a lot of memories in, like, for the first drafts of this book, the first couple drafts.
mhm,
I mean, memories
mhm,
of just all kinds of things. And my editor was like, Tony, you only need to include the memories that really sort of matter as it relates to the message behind this book, right?
sure.
And so I was like, yo, what are the ones around language? Like, what are the ones that I can remember around language? And I had this memory. And so for folks out there, I had this memory of being in a spelling bee contest in 7th grade. And I'm in a, mostly Black kind of school, but there's a couple white
Mhm.
kids in there, and then this white girl, and I called her a little Karen in the book because I just wanted, humor. I think humor is
Uh-huh.
fun in books,
Oh,
right?
amazing. Uh-huh.
And the word that I had to spell to win this round was clavichord, and I spelled it the way that I heard it, which was Clavicord.
Mhm,
I did not know that there was an H
mhm.
between the C. Anyway, and so what happens is little Karen gets up, and I get it wrong, and little Karen gets up and she answers she spells the word correctly, and then when she's done, literally has the audacity to say, Tony, like, she said, the H you missed in clavichord has to do with its, like, English German origins or something, some ridiculous thing. And I was like, wait, what? Like, how do you know
Yeah,
something about the history of language so
yeah.
that it helps you spell? What is that? Like, why do you know that and I don't? That is
Mhm,
not fair. I remember just learning. So for me, I remember, and so seriously, and so what wound up happening was when I got into high school, I started taking Latin because I was like,
wow.
I heard that there's something about learning the roots of words that help you
Mhm,
figure things out better. Like, I
wow.
was like, that's not fair that white girl knew that. Why does she know that?
Wow. Wow. It's crazy how much like, an experience like that, which is, like, what? That was probably, like that experience in itself was probably, like, what, 10 minutes, 5 minutes in
Yes.
itself?
Very,
And then
but
how much that has influenced the rest of your life.
I
Like,
will
the
be
rest of your life.
43 years old and I'm still holding on to that. Okay.
Exactly. Exactly.
Trauma. You talk about the trauma. Like,
Exactly.
I held on to that,
That
which relatedly, right? I'm going to
uh-huh.
connect a wonderful dot here, right? Related to, like, another thing about how this book came to be is in this book, I include handwritten copies of handwritten poems that I wrote when I was a kid.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
here's how this came to be, because it's very much linked to trauma. This is the truth. So in 2019, so a year before I knew that I was going to write some kind of book, I was legit in therapy. right? Like I just
Wow.
got laid off from my full-time job. I'm
Wow.
writing my dissertation. My husband, we had just got married the year before. He had just got laid off. It was a lot of mess going on. And so I'm in therapy. And my therapist was like, Tony, sounds like you have all this like suppressed anger and sadness, and like it
Mhm.
seems like there's this suppressed emotions, and
Mhm.
you are clearly projecting them onto people in your life that you love, right?
Wow.
Like you need to, like, there's something about this. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, he says, and remember, Tony, you told me that you have this box of poems that you've been lugging around since you were a
Huh.
kid. He was like, I
Huh.
was like, he was like, where's that box? I was like, what's in the closet where I keep it? He was like, why do you keep that? And what's it? What's
What
in
are you
there?
doing
What's
with
in
it? Yeah.
there? Yeah. And I was like, I never really thought about it. I've always just carried them around. And so
Mhm.
one weekend I opened up that box and I spent a weekend reading, and I have pictures of it. I reading all of these poems I wrote as a kid. And I was like, well, it was almost like a ritual. Some of them I ripped up, some of them I burned. I cried when I read some of them, but I learned a lot about myself and what I was suppressing, all the stuff that I was feeling. I
Uh-huh.
packed into those
You put it in
poems,
a wow.
and I had been hoarding them,
Literally.
literally hoarding that with me. And so it wasn't until
Wow.
I got free of those, and then it was a matter of which ones do I keep, which ones
Uh-huh.
served me. And so some of them are the ones that went into at least this first book, because there's a couple that actually go into a second book. So I got a two-book there with
Wow.
heart.
Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Talk
That
about range. Talk about range. Hey, let's go. That's incredible. Honestly, that's
baby.
incredible. And I think just
Yeah, but that's
listening
how
to
that
you
happened.
and what was the process like? And I'm obviously you shout out your editor already. And what was the process like going through the memories or experiences that you originally wanted to put in the book versus
Uh-huh.
what you had to take out? Because I know there's times where you have a moment and you're like, this is it. Like, this is
Yeah.
something that I need in the book, or I feel like it's going to fit in the book. And then maybe your editor's like, actually, maybe it doesn't fit. What was your process in weaving out moments that actually meant a lot to you
Yeah.
um, in this whole story? Because I can only imagine there was tons, which you even mentioned, like, are going to go into your next one. Like, what was that process like?
That's also a really good question. And so the best way that I can describe it is my process. It, it was, so I'll just say, I'll walk you through that. We've got the time. So when I come back from USC with Jason and COVID-19
Mhm.
hits in March 2020, I had just defended my dissertation like in October of 2019. So I thought,
Busy. You're busy.
I thought that the book that I was going to write was a young adult version of my dissertation. I was like, oh, I'm going to
Oh.
write something that's going to like talk about how I interview these people who are poets and spoken word artists and educators, and I'm gonna literally like write like a dissertation, young adult
Uh-huh.
style, right? Like that.
Uh-huh.
That's
Uh-huh.
what
Uh-huh.
I told myself, and so I wrote that book, and I think I called it in my head on being an EdMC or something like that, because EdMC
Uh-huh.
was my dissertation. And it took me maybe, I don't know, maybe like 3 weeks. I don't know what. And again, I'm not, and it had some memories. It was just a bit of a, I don't know. So I called, this is the truth. Most people don't even really know the story. So I called Jason. I was like, yo, Jay, I think I got the book, bro. And he was like, okay. And I'm like, yeah. Um, he was like, well, what are you going to do about it? I was like, yo, I think, I don't know. I'm trying to publish a joint. He's like, you got to get a literary agent. This is important,
Uh-huh.
right? So I'm like, well, I don't even know what that is or who that is or what it means. I don't know of the publishing industry. Like I don't, you know what I mean? And
Uh-huh.
so the short story is I'm doing all this Googling. What is a literary agent? How do you find them? What
Mhm.
is a query letter? Like I went on this like journey of figuring
Mhm.
out how to acquire an agent. And so what I did was, this is the absolute truth, because I got to tell you how I got to the memories getting taken out. This is how it happened. So I query 13. This is what I did. I spent another weekend. This is my thing with weekends, looking over almost every agency website, literary agency website
Wow.
from this poets and writers database.org or some pw.org.
Mhm.
Clicked on and started at the bottom and went clicked on every single agency, looked at every single agent for the most parts, what they were looking for. And any person that said they were looking for marginalized voices, underrepresented, I was like, you're looking
Yep.
for black people. What are you looking
That's me.
for? right. Always gay. Like I'm like, I hit a couple
All
boxes,
of
right?
them.
What's up? And so I query, I think 13 literary
Wow.
agents. And within a couple days, it was very surprising. I had got feedback from some folks already saying, this is not quite for me. No thanks. But shout out to Annie Huang at Aisha Pandey Literary. We got on the phone and she was like, look, this thing that you're writing is it's not a young adult version of your dissertation. She goes, it is not that. She goes, you are embedding stories about you and how you came to be who you are. That's what's in here. She goes, and you write with this prose, and it's really, really cool. So let's work together to figure something out. So here's the truth. I thought, because I don't know much about form, or again, I don't know anything about the publishing industry. She thought that I would be, or my agent recommended that I would write a memoir and critical essays like Kaise Lehman,
Oh,
or Sonia
interesting.
Rankin, or Kathy Parker, like those folks. Because she was like, Tony, this is your voice. You sort of write with this rhythmic thing. You've got the, but she was like, but I just could not get it together. We went through, I think, a year and a half of multiple drafts of memoirs and essays and like all sorts. And she goes, Tony, you know what? This is the truth. She says, let's just go with a poetry collection. You have all the poems. You know, I've been with you since 2020. Here it is. It's 2021. We're about to go into 2022. We should just, probably start thinking about what poetry collections don't really sell that well, but maybe boom, 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 boom. And so I put together a poetry collection and I call it Knucklehead. This is really important. Again, how we get to the memories.
Wow.
Poetry collection called Knucklehead, right? And it's poems, just about being black, gay man in America and black men. And it's just a really dope collection of poems. But it was traditional poetry collection, right? So we submit that, but in the proposal, we say that I'm also working on this idea of a memoir in verse, because that's when I started reading Elizabeth Acevedo, Mahogany Brown, Candace Elo. Like once I started reading those authors, I was like, well, maybe the thing that I'm writing could be a memoir in verse. And so we said future works include this. Anyway, so what happens is we send it out, multiple publishers hit back, Harper, Nick Millen, some of the, quite a few of the big ones hit back, and they're like, yo, this poetry collection is cool, but what about this memoir in verse? Can we see that? And so another weekend moment, my agent was like, Tony, look, how soon?
What can you do in a couple days?
What can you do? And so I was like, all right. So I locked myself in my office and I wrote for 3 days. And so this is how it happened is I did a dump. Like, it was like a purging. It was sort of like, it was 50 pages of like everything that I could, that was coming to how I was born, who my mama is, just a bunch of stuff dumped onto the page. It was not necessarily in any particular kind of order. There wasn't much of the strategy involved, but it was but it was verse. And what happens is HarperCollins was like, yo, we want both of them joints. We want both Knucklehead and we want How the Boogeyman Became a Poet, but Boogeyman needs to come first.
Wow.
So that occurred in July of 2022. So it took me about 4 months of writing and editing, going back and forth. I sent my editor 80,000 words first.
Oh my.
And I think that, so to your point, I think that what I learned was I needed to get everything out in order for me to realize what to take out, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's almost I needed to make the whole bowl of ingredients or the salad or whatever. Then I'm like, you know what? We need to take the carrot out. Let's take, and so that's what it became a purge. And the cool thing about that was it helped me connect a lot of dots, because when writing, sometimes thoughts are a little bit, there could be gaps sometimes in the timeline. And so when I got it all out, I was able to identify like, oh, this connects with that. It was sort of like creating a timeline. And so that's how I got to like fall 99.
Wow.
And it was like, oh, I'm talking about this particular snapshot in my life. Got it.
It was, it was giving me all, I was born in 88. So I consider myself a 90s baby. Because I don't know a lot of the 80s stuff. But it was giving me so many memories, like from like music, from like just all the I have so many experiences written down. Like when you talked about like the urinal experience.
Oh yeah,
I was like, why?
I know I'm not the only person, and I don't. That has nothing. It has nothing to do with sexuality. I just think it's a ridiculous.
Oh my gosh! When you said that, I was like, yes. Yes.
Nobody
Yes.
likes this.
I was like, why ain't no one else talking about this? Like, this is like,
This is what I'm saying. Like, this is really inappropriate, right?
it
So for
was.
readers to need to know that there's a memory I write about when I go to the club with my friends, like to like a, and I'm partying. We go to the bathroom, and inside the men's room there are toilet, but there's like no stalls. There's like no
There's
guard
no like
barrier,
little walls.
no
Yeah.
wall, and so it's like you and the people next to you, all of y'all just like that's just really uncomfortable.
It's so uncomfortable. But you had so many, like, I think you did. One of the things I loved that there were so many moments where you were able to go so deep.
Yeah,
And I mean, it was like gut wrenching and
yeah,
it was like heartbreaking. And then
yeah.
within that, you brought so much humor and love
I
and like
appreciate that.
passion. Like, and I was like, I mean, I wasn't surprised, but it honestly, like, it was like giving me so many vibes throughout. Like,
I love that. I
I
appreciate
loved how you used, you kept using like the refrain, like, they don't know, they don't know, they don't know over
Yeah,
and over again. And one of them you
yeah.
said, like, they don't know that my mom is running from her own boogie.
Me
Oh my God.
person.
I
Yeah.
was like, it hit me in my soul that it was, you just did such a phenomenal
I
job.
really appreciate that. Some of the best advice, I've ever received. Well, not really, it wasn't even really advice. I think it was just something I'd overheard, again, on the Jason Reynolds moment. He had said something like, I just want to make sure readers are taken care of.
Mm,
And, I thought about that, when I was writing this book. It was like, how can I just make, because I'm like, I want readers to laugh. I want them to feel things. I kind of want to bring them almost to the points of like collapse, but then like carefully cradle them
you
back.
did.
I was
You
also thinking about
did.
like how to do that because I was like, my mom gonna read this book.
Mhm.
My father gonna read this book, right? You
Mhm.
gonna go? Oh, you're fine. Yeah, my mother's gonna read this book. My father's gonna read this book. I'm just trying to think about like how can I make sure that
Of
they
course.
too
Of
can
course.
kind of be kind of cradled. But I wanted to again have. This is the thing. Once I kind of figured out what I was going to do about the book, it was like, how can I embed? I don't know. I was thinking like all sorts of things. Like, there's subtle references to hip hop lyrics in there that some people might catch. I was at my mom's house yesterday, and my
Uh-huh.
sister realized that I embedded a little nugget from the movie A Bronx Tale
Huh.
in this book. Aha! Most people, have you ever seen the movie A Bronx Tale?
I need to
With
write this down because I don't remember which part this was.
this would be fun. So if you go back and like, especially I think if you read it, maybe I don't know,
Uh-huh.
anyway. But
Uh-huh.
there's a part in the Bronx Tale where Calogero and Jane go. They're about to go on their first date,
Uh-huh.
and there's this whole scene where he unlocks the door for her to get into Robert De Niro's car, into a
Okay.
right, and he walks around the back and he watches to see if she reaches over to unlock his door.
Oh.
And it
Okay.
and it was like, oh, that means that that's not a selfish person. And so there's
Wow. Oh, I gotta go back. I gotta listen again.
oh, the best part about this is the thing that you should probably know, Gary, is so I did this on purpose. So when you go back and check out Boogeyman again, if you decide to read it again,
I
whatever,
will. I
I
will.
embedded all kinds of things in there. And I was like, I wonder who's going to catch them. They're like little nuggets, right? So there's another one where, I had a great day because I think this is the one when I woke up and my mother made breakfast without bacon. There was no
Uh-huh.
bacon. So mama made breakfast with no hog, right? And if you know hip hop, you would know Ice Cube today was a good day. And so you would also know at the very end of that particular section, because I learned that I got accepted to Morgan State University in the
Mhm.
letter,
Mhm.
right? But also say like, I got my grub on, but then pig out, right?
Oh
And so,
my gosh. Oh my god.
oh, there's all kind of things going
And
on in this.
I think that's why I loved it so much because I'm like, I love hip hop. I don't know my hip hop history as much as like
It's
a
okay.
lot of other people, but
It's all right.
I think this is one of the reasons why I loved the audio because I felt like I was listening to like a rap album.
Yeah.
Honestly,
I'm aiming for, look, if I could,
it
I'm aiming for Grammy
oh my
status.
god, it was, and you know what? And I'm not just saying this either. It would lend itself so well to film as well, like just like the
Ooh,
way it's set up. I don't
you
know
can
if you've ever
speak
thought
that
about.
out.
I don't know how that happens, but I'll put that in the universe as
I
well.
received that. You can
I'll put that in
manifest that
the
thing.
universe. But
You can
it's
manifest. You can.
as I was listening, I was envisioning
You can
you
see it.
and your friends and your school and your experiences along the way.
Yeah, I appreciate that because
Incredible.
I was having a conversation with I'm a feel bad because I'm a mispronounce the sister's name, but I just finished reading her book. It's Where Sleeping Girls Lie. She's based out of
Oh,
London.
um,
For
What is
Farida Abiyeke. Oh, I'm sorry, sister, but I love her.
No, we get it.
Yeah, we were at a Teen Book Con in Houston, and we were talking about how she goes when she writes.
Mm-hmm.
She says, I'm jealous of people who write and they see it like a movie. She goes, I'm someone who
Mm,
can't do that, but I am.
you
So for
are.
me, when I sit down to write, it's sort of this vision, like I'm writing about what I'm seeing in my head, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And of
Mm-hmm.
course, there's a focus on the craft, but I'm like thinking of there's a memory. There's like I'm
Mm-hmm.
creating a movie. And so for me,
Mm-hmm.
'cause I'm like, I want readers to have that experience. Like I want you to read the book or even hear the book and like just picture like what's going on,
It
and I'm
gives me
like, okay,
all those
I
like
can give you all the
old
imagery, right? Like
90s movie vibes, like, like like the soundtrack would be amazing. Like,
I
gosh, I
appreciate that.
picture like when you're at the prom and just like
Yeah.
the music that's playing, like you play references to music,
Yep.
like just
Yeah.
the way it's all set up is just like
I
incredible.
appreciate that. I
Um,
appreciate that. The other thing, it's interesting is making me think about, I don't even know how it connects, but, in terms of what memories and like how all that stuff sort of showed up in at that time period. Because what I wanted to make crystal clear was there's a whole hip hop history, but also there's a history with Black people, right,
mhm.
in this country in a mess. And so there's a story in there I tell about my friend Gary, who was literally shot
Yes,
and killed by PG
yes.
County police officers in '99. That's a real story. And what
Mhm,
readers probably don't know is what had happened was, this is the truth. I wasn't even sure. I knew that moment meant a lot to me, right?
mhm.
I couldn't figure out how I was connected to Boogeyman becoming a poet until, I really, seriously, I woke up 3 o'clock in the morning. I was in this house. I was working on the book. I was writing the book, and I had just got to, I forgot what part of the story. And I, I woke up and I heard my friend's voice in my head. It's the truth.
Wow.
And it was, it was like, write my story, right, or whatever. And
Mhm.
I ran downstairs, right, so to this computer I'm talking, and I cried my way through writing that chapter.
I
That
can
is the
imagine.
absolute truth. Like I legit like poured out tears. But for me, I think that was what the writing was about. But like that's how much went
Mhm.
into this thing.
No, I could tell just the way you talked about him and how much of a, you know, not just friendship, like brotherhood that
Yeah,
he
yeah.
built
And I'm
with
like,
you
yo, that
guys.
was 1999. Black boy being
Wow.
killed by cops. Like, come on,
Wow.
this is not new.
No, no. Wow. I mean, again, just phenomenal, phenomenal work. And I'm thinking that the other line that I had here was like you had shattering glass windows with sticks and stones. Goodness gracious. There's I mean, I literally have a list of lines.
This excites me. This excites
Oh,
me.
I couldn't help myself. I honestly couldn't help myself. Like, as I was looking through, I was like, man, how do you get to the point where you have so much you want to share,
Hmm.
but then like you said, like you have to narrow it down. But I think you said it like you have more. This is number one, which is
Yeah,
incredible. But you have more. You have so much more to say. And you asked yourself in the beginning, you were like, well, who wants to hear like your story, etc.
yeah.
Everyone needs to hear your story.
I
Everyone needs
appreciate
to hear your
that, man. I
story.
appreciate that. I appreciate
No.
it. I think she's going to mention how, because another little nugget, which is interesting, is I forgot what page it's on, but it's right after. So in the book, it's right after I finish, or it's one of the last lines of the poem that I perform at the open mic when I'm at Towson
Mm,
University.
uh-huh.
Say um, something about giving my audience a break halfway through, and they're going to have to
Uh-huh.
come back to hear this knucklehead spit part
Uh-huh.
two. That's because my second book is called Knucklehead.
Oh my gosh. Look at this is crazy. All the insights.
Yeah,
All the insights.
I think that's
All the
and so for me
insights.
that became the fun part. Like once I kind of got a grasp on, like I know, and so you should probably know something about like even the title, like there's so much to tell you about this book. Like first of all, how
Mhm.
the title came. The title
Mhm.
came. I wrote a poem. This is important. I didn't start writing this book until 2022 ish, right, or 2020,
Mhm.
whatever it is. I wrote a poem that is the epilogue of that in the book called "Awaken Awesome."
Ah.
Um, right? That poem, we fear what we love, and the very last line is, and so the boogeyman became a poet. What people don't know is I wrote that poem in like 2012 or 2011, right?
Wow.
I wrote that poem after a buddy of mine called me. He was having a bad day, and I tried to cheer him up. It was sort of like, yo, anyway, well, not cheer him up with the poem, but like after trying to
Mhm.
cheer him up on the phone, just with positive
Sure.
affirmation. Just like as a kid, I still process my emotions by writing things. And so I got off
Mhm.
that call and I was like, man, like, I feel like there's this poem about being great and amazing and awakening your greatness, and I just need to get that out my chest. And I wrote that poem, and the last line became, and so the Boogeyman became a poet, which had nothing to do with my friend, had nothing to do with him. But I knew that, all of my poems got something to do with me first, and so I'm gonna keep it. And I held on to that thing. And so it wasn't until, and so what wound up happening was, it wasn't until, yeah, you need me, brother? All right, hold on one second. I'll be right back.
Take your time.
So, it is funny. my man, like, oh yeah, y'all can either get like new Freon in your AC unit, which is like $1,300, or for real, y'all kind of just need a whole new system. That's like $5.
Oh my god! Wow.
So,
at least you're getting it fixed, though.
Yeah. We got to. It gets. This funny thing about Washington D.C. is, I don't know if you've been here or not, but it is the South. It's not like southern. At least U.S. It gets hot.
It's hot. It is hot.
Yeah, mosquitoes and shit, and we're in a swamp. There's a lot going on.
It's crazy. I mean, this has been such great conversation. I had a few specific questions.
Sure.
You kind of answered most of them. I guess one of the questions that I wanted to ask you about, and you kind of talked about it a little bit, how do you see poetry and spoken word as like a vehicle for like social change and activism? And you've talked a little bit about it numerous times through speaking engagements. You've talked about it online. Are there like specific causes or issues that you feel particularly like compelled to address through poetry? So like, what are they? And
these are really good questions. Because the first thing that I think about is voice. This is the truth. As a kid, writing poetry to myself on the page was an expression of my voice. Right, it's what my written voice sounds like, or at least what the voice in my head sounds like when I put it down on the paper. And so there's the poetry on the page, but then once it's on the stage, once my voice, I hear it amplified, like on a microphone, like amplified, like it. There's something about it jets out. Like, I make a lot of references in my book to like a preacher and a MC, right? This idea that like words can move crowds, like preachers can move congregations. I say like teachers can move classrooms, which, by the way, education is definitely like my issue area for sure. Right? Racial disparities in education, linguistic racism, all that kind of mess. I think we have a racist foundation of education
in general.
Yes, not much of what we do, and everybody wonder why there's all these problems. I'm like, well, the schools were never built for people like me to be great. Like, they just weren't. Just designed to be great. We're not designed to be. We were designed to be great, but the school system was not anyway. And so, I write about those things. But when I think so much about, like, if anything, one thing I've learned is every poem that I write and every poem that I perform is not for everybody. Right. But if anything, it is for at least one person. I firmly believe this. I performed in places, thousands of people. I've also performed in places with 2 people. And those 2 people get the same level of energy and commitment and love, and right, because I'm like, yo, you are supposed to be here on purpose, just like we're supposed to be here. And I think that what happens is when I'm able to share my poetry or to share poems or to tell stories, I think folks are able to like feel seen, feel heard, feel understood, to be like, oh my gosh, like that makes sense. Like, even like my book, for a great example, you don't have to be a gay Black boy to understand what it's like to be someone struggling with identity. Right. Or struggling with like the world and like feeling suppressed, and you don't. Right. And so I think there's something about finding solidarity in that. And that's where the advocacy and stuff comes in. It's like, yo, I'm gonna spit this poem because I know somebody need to hear it. Yep. And I'm either going to cheer you up, I might piss you off, I might convince you to change the world, but I do know that this is an agency. Like, I can amplify this thing. I can rally you up. You know what I mean? And so that's, for me, it's where it comes from. And so when I think about issues, I'm always like, yo, it's education, it's racial, injustice in education. I write a lot about and perform a lot about Black masculinity. This is really important as someone who absolutely identifies with hip hop culture. I'm not a rapper, but I'm hip hop to my core all day, right? The culture is just, I'm 43 years old. I don't know where without hip hop, right? But I'm also a gay man, right? And this is important, like Black gay man connected. My PhD It's an education leadership with a focus on hip hop. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But when you think about the context in which people like me are represented in hip hop, it's never in these celebratory kinds of ways. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting that through literature, through poetry, through spoken word, through the art of the word is where there's sort of this interesting space that I've been able to kind of navigate. And it's not just me, you know what I mean? But I think about shots of people like Bettina Love, um,
Mm-hmm.
Punish for Dreaming, also hip hop head, but gay. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, there's something about, I don't know, there's something in there that I want to just share.
And so you talk about that, and like the book in itself, it touches on that, and it explains it in a way that is so accessible
Yeah,
as well. It's
I
like if
appreciate that.
I mean, I'm an adult, but like a kid could look at that, read it, dissect it, and understand so much about what you just mentioned by the
I,
words.
that means a great, the affirmations. Because
I'm
again,
telling you, I'm
it's
telling
about
you.
accessibility. Because the other thing is, I mean, this is important because I'm 40-year-old, well, 40, I'll be 43, whatever, 40-year-old-ish man writing books for kids or at
Mm-hmm.
least for young people. It's important, right? Like to think about like my voice and like
Mm-hmm.
my editor would tell me sometimes like, Tony, sounds like you're trying to teach. You gotta like ease
Mm-hmm.
up. Like you gotta,
Mm-hmm.
you can't force things
Mm-hmm.
on readers. And as an
Mm-hmm.
adult, we want to do this to young people. We want to teach them. We want to tell them. We want to,
Mm-hmm.
like I want to write, there's a black feminist perspective I even throw in this book when I talk
Yep.
about being in the club dancing with my friends.
Yep.
And I'm like, I don't try,
Uh-huh.
but I was like,
Uh-huh.
how do I write about this in a way that's accessible, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
something that I remember doing, and I was really intentional about this, was I was like, if anything, I didn't know how in the world I was going to get to college, but I figured it out.
You did.
And I'm thinking about any other students or people who might read this book who might not know what that pathway might look like. I'm like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to talk about financial aid, at least in the US system, the FAFSA. I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to include an example of a personal statement, right? Like I'm going
Uh-huh.
like,
Uh-huh.
right? I'm going to figure out a way to make sure that young people, readers, are going to get knowledge. I'm an educator. Like I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
embed knowledge in this thing. This is
Mm-hmm.
my ancestors put knowledge in poems, in songs. I
Uh-huh.
put messages
It's so
in
true.
here for the
It's
purposes of
so
Black people's
true.
liberation. I did that on purpose.
It did. It did. Totally. I mean, again, absolutely phenomenal. One of the first books that I've read this year, listened to, the only book I've listened to this year, one of the first books I got into this year. I will be sharing it. I will
Yeah,
be
appreciate it.
putting it into the world and hands as much as possible. Um, and you mentioned it, and you can share as much as you can.
Yeah,
I am excited about more from
yeah,
Doctor. I'm really interested in what you do next. If you
yeah,
can share, because I know
yeah,
as an author,
yeah.
sometimes there's a bit of gray area there. But like, what do you have next? What are you looking
It's
forward
no
to?
gray. I'm happy to share because
Yeah.
it's coming. And it's interesting because now is the time of year, because around this time last year is when um, they had just started releasing the advanced readers copies of the Boogeyman and all that other kind of promotion was picking up marketing. There was a book cover announcement. And so at some point in the next couple of months, the world will
Mm-hmm.
also hear that there's another book coming from Tony Keith Jr. And I'm very excited about this one because it is Knucklehead. It is a poetry collection to Black boys and men, especially the gay queer ones and the people who love us. So I'm like, if you
Mm-hmm.
love me, this book is for
Mm-hmm.
you, right?
Let's go.
But what it is, it's a collection of poems, and the best part about it is, I learned a new language now that I'm in the publishing industry. Is after writing Boogeyman. So remember, it's important. Sort of, Knucklehead was sort of written as a whole collection, and then Boogeyman needed to be written, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Knucklehead just kind of stayed where it was, right? While I wrote Boogeyman. After I wrote Boogeyman, I then knew how to write Knucklehead differently. This
Huh.
is important, right? There was sort of this thing of like, wait a minute, I don't know if I want the kind of poetry collection where it's like, ooh, let me go to the love poem section. Boop, boop,
Sure.
boop. Love,
Sure.
or we could just like piece it apart. I wanted something that readers would be like, from beginning to end, from cover to cover. What is a
Mm-hmm.
poetry collection that could look like that? And out of, out of nowhere, this, not even really out of nowhere, last summer,
Mm-hmm.
I was doing some workshops with about 40 Black high school boys from Washington, D.C. It's around Black masculinity and hip hop and poetry, like all the things I love to like talk about. And I mentioned to them, I got this book called Boogeyman coming out soon because it wasn't even out yet. I was like, here's the cover, here's some, I'm gonna read something from it. And I was like, I got this collection of poems coming out too called Knucklehead. This is important. So on the board, I wrote Knucklehead, but I spelled it Knucklhead. I missed an E. Like in the spelling. And I was like, yeah, these are poems. Like, I'm writing poems for y'all. You know what I mean? It's for all Black boy. I'm telling them about the collection, and I read them some of the poems from the collection, right? Now, this is before it was edited. This was before I got anyway. And so I was like, oh, I misspelled the thing on the board. And they was like, nah, keep it like that. You should keep it. You should keep it like that. Or maybe on the book cover, like maybe had him draw like the little triangle.
Wow.
So it was the editing. So anyway, so I knew in that moment, like, I have to remember when I write Knucklehead, I need to write it to these boys, right? Not like some broad poetry collection. I need to write to them specifically. And so the language that I learned was epistolary, apparently. That's the word. But I wrote letters to those knuckleheads.
Wow.
So so it begins with like this dear knucklehead. Have you ever had a planet lodged in your belly that was too big for fit or something? Anyway, but it's good. And so,
my gosh.
So once there's like this sort of first letter that sets up like a theme, like the first theme is, around, I think what is the first theme? I should know this better. Anyway, but then there's some poems that follow, but it has the same flow of Boogeyman where the titles sort of serve as transitions, right? It's fine. It's fine. Love poems in there about me and my husband. It's but it's a series of letters to knuckleheads, and it's sensational. Like it's and here's why. And I'm not probably I'm talking too much, but here's why. This is what my agent and I always have said. It was the poetry that got me here. Yeah. Right? So those poems that were in Knucklehead existed before Boogeyman became a poet. And then it was just a matter of, and the other thing I should mention is some of the poems in Knucklehead make direct linkages to some of the stories of Boogeyman.
Oh no!
Oh yes!
Oh no!
So there's going to be this moment of like, oh, you got to read them together. Like my agent is like the memoir is the flesh, but Knucklehead is the bones, right? Like that's all the, but yeah, it's so good.
I'm excited. I'm excited.
It's
I'm
good.
excited.
And the last thing I'll say is some of the poems in Knucklehead, this is the truth, are also original poems that I wrote as a kid. I just slightly remixed them, and it'd be great. I want to readers would ever figure out which one, because there's no handwritten copies in this. These are just, the last thing I'll say is there's going to be illustrations in this book, and my gosh.
Stop it.
Yo. The artist, I don't think I can say the name yet, because I write with a lot of imagery, as you probably know, has specifically illustrated images of like little knuckleheads, like little Black boys.
What?
With poems. It's so good.
Come on.
Yeah, so that's coming that, and then later on I want to talk to you about this because I have an interest maybe in writing a children's picture book. I don't know.
You can. Tony, you.
I'm thinking about it. I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
You said the same thing about writing what you created, right? And honestly, like I said it in the beginning, but I see you. I appreciate you. I want to see more from you. It is you. What you are doing is absolutely phenomenal, and I appreciate it so much.
I appreciate that, brother. I received that.
Where can people find you online?
Yeah, so first, the good thing is I can't believe that I can say I'm very Googleable now. This is bizarre. But TonyKeithJr.com or at Tony Keith Jr. on all things. You can. I'm not as active on X because it's now called X and I miss Twitter. But Instagram is usually kind of like my social media of choice. But they can find me there. Just pop in Google how the Boogeyman became a poet, and that's it.
I appreciate you.
Likewise. Thank you.
This was amazing. I'm gonna